Now then, just a quick video for Logan. A lot of laps spun in Oulton Park last weekend. Just want to illustrate basically, the progress over the whole session. We're going to get rid of some of these laps now because they're not relevant. You're still learning and stuff like this. But you can see how there was a trend here with the braking zone. And during the races then, it was possible to absolutely crack those and really start utilizing some late braking, and if I say as well, that piece there being steeper, some harder braking and stuff like that. So it's just a progress really. You can see all of these steps, all of that's progress through the weekend. So we'll start picking this apart now. Now then, before I continue, just want to jump into times compare here. On the green lap we have a theoretical value here of 151.7, and on the yellow lap then we have a theoretical lap time of 150.4. so there was plenty of potential here. When we go back to the GPS speed, it's very clear, looking at the entry, this is into Druids, that you were clearly robbed. You were really on track for a solid time right here. And then whatever has happened on this lap, you've had to back out. And it's pretty evident because the green lap right here starts to gain its time back. Now, it wasn't incredibly detrimental. There's definitely something to be seen here where this is the beginning of the loss of time on that green lap. So you can see clearly, you can see the braking marker on the green lap. Again, that's paramount of someone being in your way. What I would say is that although it appears that the braking was harder here to get into the corner, the GPS speed dropped off just a little bit too much. Again, someone could have been in the way. If it was this guy here, it might have been the same person here. You arrived in there with a bit more GPS speed before, in essence, you can see the difference here at the yellow. Let's see what that value is. So there, your minimum velocity is 145. And you can see here then that the green lap had a minimum velocity of 133, which is a big difference. So again, racing data is a bit sort of dodgy because, people are in your way and it's a very stressful situation as well. I do want to look at some fun values really. There's not really much to come from this because it's racing data as such. There's always corners you could have apexed a bit harder in. There's always braking markers you could have pushed back, but that's not where the real fun stuff is. So we'll have a look now. So I just want to capture the maximum braking G-force coming into the second chicane. And basically I'm looking at this graph right here. Okay. That's the braking in the GPS, and you can see over here then we have the GPS values, and I just want to isolate which is the maximum value. So on the yellow lap, we can get it to settle at the bottom there. It's better with a mouse. There it is. We're looking at negative minus 1.07 G. For the moment, that's the heaviest braking I've seen in there, especially good of these lap times. On the green lap then, you can see right there then, just correct that, the G is negative 0.9. Okay, so it's pretty obvious how that affects the GPS trace, but it's very easy to see that, time is gained here, the kind of way. So that's very good work. Something I love about this is that the GPS speed is clearly in acceleration. Okay, so there's obviously throttle applied here. We're on the exit of the apex of turn 4, and I just want to see some cool values here. And I've already prepared this, but basically we see the maximum lean angle of the bike in here is 67.66 degrees, and on the green lap then 66.5. And it's a very interesting topic that basically to add lean angle you must add speed. you know, so it's illustrative of what the tires can handle, and that's a fantastic place. A lot of camber in that corner, but at the same time, in terms of what the rider's feeling, like you'd nearly feel perhaps inverted on the corner, you know, the kind of way. So that's great work. I like to see that. The last corner as well was pretty impressive as well. This is a right-hander. We're looking at 64 degrees there. You see it flashing across the screen. 64. There you are. 64.86. And there's not much camber there. And that's a pretty hard corner as well, if I do say so, that lodge corner. So 64 degrees, genuinely, like that's pretty much, you know, MotoGP can probably hit about 68, but in terms of like World Superbike level, you know, that is very, very close to a limit. The only thing that's stopping you going further is probably the geometry of the bike, you know. The lean angle calculated up here is not actually the same. Basically, it's not factoring in the width of your tires and all sorts of other parameters. But, you know, I'm going off this one here, basically. But 64 is definitely impressive. Looking then at some hefty roll rates. Roll rate is in degrees per second. Okay, and we're looking at the first chicane. This is correcting the bike after, if I just zoom in, after you've exited. So that's pretty much what a chicane looks like in roll rate. And then the other chicane is here, obviously, after we've braked. But very interesting to see how the roll rates on the first chicane are not exceeded, are exceeded by the second chicane. This is pretty phenomenal. You know, so it's all about the entry and the exits and stuff like this. But the only thing that actually makes this work is the input at the handlebar. So you can imagine that the harder you're pulling on the bar, the faster she's going to change direction. We want to see what the maximum value is here. I'll just pause it for a sec. No, that's it there. 61 degrees per second of direction change. And again, it's after, well, that's lovely. That's 61 degrees per second right in the first change of direction. So from all the way right to all the way left. And that is the level of speed that you are able to initiate. So you're pretty much getting the whole turn or the whole flick from upright, from leaned over to upright done pretty much in a second, you know, kind of way. So, and it's very interesting that when you see that figure there, it can kind of give you the imagination to say that, well, perhaps it could be repeated here when you're changing direction. But generally speaking, people will have a dominant side to their core power, or perhaps they prefer lefts to rights and stuff like this. So it's nice to be aware that we're going from a right-hander into a left-hander, and we're pulling a considerable extra degree of force there. And then there's one single corner here that I just want to take a look at. That's pretty good. Let me just zoom out and see where he is. Wow, that's going up the hill. Okay, so it looks like you're pretty much tipping that curb coming out of the clay hill. There it is there. What's that? 69 degrees per second. So you can kind of see that is some savage roll rates. And, you know, you can kind of think of the other corners then, like, is it necessary to be that quick? Or perhaps the input at the handlebar could be stronger to make these values larger, which means then we're knocking the bike over faster, you know, kind of way. But 70 degrees per second pretty much in that one instance going up Clay Hill. And that's pretty awesome. You'll have to forgive me for not having the track map in the bottom corner here, but I just want to show you a couple of places where you could perhaps capitalize. This here is the acceleration into turn 3, and then all of this is turn 3 here. Okay. What I want to show you is that there is 2 sets of acceleration here, and I believe that's because there is a massive kicker in the track, a big hump that you cannot see. One thing that we learned from a debrief with another rider was that this hump was upsetting a lot of people's front ends. So after the backside of the hump was made available, essentially they pretty much got tank slapper conditions, and it was pretty a lot of head shake and pretty terrifying. One suggestion that did actually clean that up for one rider was that as you go over the hump, rather than backing off the throttle, that you lift your bum out of the seat just an inch, hover, use your hamstrings, and then as the bike rides over that lip, you effectively absorb the lip with your body and then let the saddle meet you in the bum on the backside, and then you can just, use your own physical mass to deliver the bike back to the road before you organize your tip in. But it's definitely possible here to keep a full throttle if you like. But if not, there's definitely something that needs to be looked at. Definitely to capitalize on some of this. I know some of the corners like Druids, that wasn't your fault. This is the yellow lap from earlier where the previous lap was actually clearly on the power and people are in the way. I just want to highlight that really good tidy riding is here. So you got lots of power, and then you're straight away on the brake, and there's no coasting. The Canoe, so there was no coasting here. For the first third of the lap, you had zero coasting, absolutely none. And you gained a bit over this hump here going into 3. So that exactly, in terms of meters, that is 15 meters of coasting going over that hump before you get into 3. Second bit of a coast is not a big deal. That only goes up to 25, so I'm not going to get too picky about 10 meters. By the end of the lap here, we have 40 meters of coasting, and that there occurred, if I go back to the GPS map, going into the last corner, which is fine because you're probably fighting somebody, or I think in this particular instance, you might have actually been shown the board by myself to say that nothing's behind you and you can chill. So in which case, therefore we know why. But to be honest, it is possible to have zero coasting. So that's just all I'm getting at there. So it's great in the race. If there was no one ahead of you and no one behind you, there was no problems. So pretty good riding overall. That's the one I wanted to see. Yeah, it is actually possible. I've seen a lap with 4 meters of coasting, and I thought it was a bit nitpicky to say to a rider to try and tidy that up, but it is possible. In this instance, I don't think you do need to. I think you did what you had to do just to bring home the P4. The other guys were gone up the road and there was no one behind you, so just maintain the race and ride smart. So I think a good job done overall. So yeah, well done.